Hello and welcome to the second unit of Cost and Management Accounting, which deals with the topic of accounting for overheads. The episode highlights the classification and different stages of overheads. In addition, it also throws light on the treatment of under-absorption and over-absorption of overheads. I'm Amrita Ghosh Kumar, and the subject specialist for this episode is Dr. Tarannum Amir, PhD in Marketing and currently teaching in Satyavati College, University of Delhi, New Delhi. The term overhead is defined as an expense which cannot be directly charged to a particular job. It includes the cost of indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. Now let us look at the classification of overheads. Overheads may be classified under various categories. 1. According to nature. According to nature, overheads are divided into 3 categories, that is indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. Number 2. According to normality. According to normality, overheads are divided into 2 categories, that is normal overheads and abnormal overheads. Normal overheads are those overheads which are incurred in attaining a given output. These overheads are unavoidable and therefore directly charged to cost of production. On the other hand, abnormal overheads are those overheads which are not expected to incur in attaining a given output. Abnormal overheads always charge to costing profit and loss account. Number 3. According to controllability. According to this category, overheads may be controllable or uncontrollable. Controllable overheads are those overheads which can be controlled by the management at the point of their occurrence, like cost of power used in a particular department. On the other hand, uncontrollable overheads are beyond the control of the management. Number 4. According to variability. Under this category, overheads are divided into 3 parts, that is variable overheads, semi-variable overheads, and fixed overheads. Overheads which change in the same ratio in which output changes are known as variable overheads, like power, salesman commission, etc. Semi-variable overheads are partly variable and partly fixed. They do not change in the same proportion in which the output changes, like depreciation, repairs and supervision cost, telephone expenses, etc. Fixed overheads remain static irrespective of changes in output. For instance, rent or insurance of a building, salaries, etc. Number 5. According to function. On the basis of function, overheads may be classified as factory overheads, office overheads, and selling and distribution overheads. Factory overheads include indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses incurred in the manufacturing department of an enterprise. For instance, power, oil, waste, etc. Office overhead is the aggregate of indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses, which are incurred in the management and administration of an enterprise like printing and stationery, directors' fees, telephone expenses, etc. Selling and distribution overheads are the overheads incurred in promoting sales and retaining customers. For instance, salesmen's salaries, advertisement expenses, and so on. Now let us look at the various stages of overheads distribution. 1. Classification of overheads. Overheads are classified as factory, office and selling. After classifying, overhead is to be grouped under suitable categories like depreciation, furniture, lighting, etc. May relate to factory or to the office. It will be appropriate to group all items of depreciation relating to factory assets or office assets at one place under a common heading depreciation with suitable subheadings. Number 2, departmentalization of overheads. The next stage is the allocation and apportionment of overheads. Allocation is the process through which overheads are charged with the full amount to a particular cost center. It is possible only when the nature of expense can be easily identified to a particular cost center, like the salary of a foreman of a particular department. If the expense is not identifiable to a particular department, apportionment of overhead is done. Apportionment of overheads is the process through which items of overheads are split and charged to the different cost centers on an equitable basis. This is done in those cases where items cannot be wholly allocated to a particular department. For instance, rent of the building cannot be allocated to a particular cost center, but will have to be apportioned amongst the various cost centers on some equitable basis. There are different bases of apportionment. A. Electric power, number of machine hours or horsepower of the machinery. B. Rent, depreciation and insurance of factory building, capital value of the asset or floor area occupied. C. Heating and lighting, number of light points, floor area and number of hours. D. Supervision, number of employees or floor area or amount of wages paid to the laborers. E. Depreciation and insurance of machinery, capital value of machinery. F. Stores overhead, value of direct materials or number of requisitions. Now let us look at apportionment of service department overheads. Service department overheads may be apportioned on the basis of A. Service. Under this method, overheads are apportioned over various departments on the basis of services actually rendered. B. Potential benefits. Under this method, overheads are apportioned on the basis of potential. C. Ability to pay method. Under this method, departments having higher revenue of production will be charged higher. Number D. Direct specific method. Under this method, overheads will be apportioned by specific criteria for different service functions. Now let us look at the basis for apportionment of overheads of service departments. Number 1. Maintenance department, actual services utilized or hours worked. Number 2. Payroll or timekeeping department, direct labor hours, number of employees, etc. Number 3. Personnel department, number of employees, rate of labor turnover. Number 4. Purchase department, number of purchase orders, value of materials purchased. Number 5. Storekeeping department, value of material purchased, number of requisitions. Number 6. Welfare department, number of employees. Number 3. Absorption of overheads. The term absorption refers to charging of overheads of a cost center to different cost units in such a way that each cost unit bears an appropriate portion of its share of overheads. Absorption is done by overhead rates. The term overhead rate is defined as a rate at which the overheads are to be charged to different cost units. It may be in the form of a percentage or per unit. Now let us look at the types of overhead rate. 1. Single overhead rate. In this case, overheads are absorbed on the basis of one single rate. This method is applied in those cases where only one major product at a continuous basis is produced. It is also known as a blanket overhead rate. It is computed as single overhead rate is equal to overhead cost for the entire factory divided by the total quantity of the base selected. Number 2. Multiple overhead rates. These overhead rates are calculated for each department or cost center. It is used in those cases where a product has to pass through a number of departments or cost centers. It is calculated as multiple overhead rate is equal to departmental overheads divided by the base. Absorption of factory overheads. Absorption of factory overheads refer to charging of the factory overheads of a particular production department to various products manufactured or jobs completed in that department. There are two methods of absorbing factory overheads, that is percentage methods and the hourly rate methods. Percentage method. There are two percentage methods, that is direct material cost method and direct labor cost method. A. Direct material cost method. Under this method, absorption rate is computed on the basis of the direct material cost. It is calculated by a formula. Factory overhead rate is equal to amount of factory overheads divided by cost of direct material used into 100. Now let us look at the suitability of direct material cost method. Number 1, this method is suitable where the amount of overheads is insignificant in relation to the cost of materials and wages. Number 2, it is used if only one kind of product is manufactured by the business enterprise. Number 3, where the prices of material do not fluctuate frequently. Now let us look at the limitations. Number 1, this method does consider time factor while most of the overheads vary with time. This may result in overcosting or undercosting of jobs. Number 2, this method does not differentiate between skilled workers and unskilled workers. Factory overheads not only depend on material but also on the type of workers employed. Number 3, the prices of material are often subject to fluctuate and therefore the total amount of overheads charged to various jobs will also fluctuate. Point number B, percentage to direct labor cost method. Under this method, the absorption rate is calculated on the basis of direct labor cost. This method is quite similar to the direct material cost method. The only difference under this method is that the factory overhead is computed on the basis of direct wages. The formula for calculating overhead under this method is factory overhead rate is equal to factory overheads divided by cost of direct labor into 100. Now let us look at the advantages of direct labor method. Number 1, labor rates do not fluctuate as often as price of material. Number 2, time factor is also taken into account. Number 3, this method gives satisfactory results in most cases because to a great extent factory overheads depend upon the number of workers employed and wages. The limitations are: number 1, this method is not appropriate when machines are extensively used. Number 2, this method is not suitable where both skilled and unskilled workers are employed. Number 3, this method will not give satisfactory result where the workers are paid on piece rate system. Point number C, prime cost method. Under this method, both direct material cost and direct wages are taken into consideration. This method is used to overcome the disadvantages of both the methods. This method is simple and easy to understand. Overhead rate is calculated as factory overhead rate is equal to factory overhead rate divided by prime cost into 100. The hourly rate method. Hourly rate method includes direct labor hour rate method, machine hour rate method and dual hour rate method. A. Direct labor hour rate method. Under this method, overheads are absorbed on the basis of number of labor hours. Overhead rate is equal to amount of overheads divided by the total number of direct labor hours. The advantages of labor hour rate are: 1. Time factor is given full recognition. Number 2, it is easy to operate. And the disadvantages of the labor hour rate are: 1. This method does not consider other factors of production except labor. 2. It does not take other expenses like power depreciation, etc. into consideration. Number B, machine hour rate method. This method is used when the processes of production is mostly carried out by machines. This method is one of the most scientific methods of absorption of overheads. Machine hour rate is calculated by dividing the amount of factory overheads incurred for a machine during a particular period by the number of machine hours during the same period. The formula for calculating machine hour rate is overhead rate is equal to factory overhead divided by machine hours. Now let us look at the advantages of machine hour rate. 1. It is one of the most scientific and accurate method of absorbing overheads. Number 2, machine hour rate helps to compare the relative efficiencies and cost of operating different machines. The disadvantages of machine hour rate are: 1. It is not suitable if manual labor is equally important. 2. It is an expensive method. 3. It is difficult to estimate the machine hours, especially when production program is not available in advance. Number C, the dual hour rate method. This method is a combination of labor hour rate and machine hour rate. This method is used in cases where both machine and labor work is employed. In such cases, overheads will be absorbed by direct labor hour rate if departments are having manual work, and by machine hour rate if departments are using machine work. Absorption of office and administration overheads. Office and administration overheads constitute a very minor portion of the total cost of production. There are different methods through which overhead rates can be calculated. A, as a percentage of factory cost. Under this method, overhead rates will be calculated as office and administration overhead rate is equal to total office and administration overheads divided by total factory cost into 100. B, as a percentage of factory overheads. Under this method, overhead rates will be calculated as office overhead rate is equal to total office and administration overheads divided by total factory overhead into 100. C, as a percentage of conversion cost. Under this method, total office and administration overheads will be divided by total conversion cost. Here, conversion cost is equal to direct labor plus direct expenses plus factory overheads, that is total office and administration overheads divided by total conversion cost into 100. Number D, as a percentage of sales, overhead rate will be calculated as office and administration overhead is equal to total office and administration overhead divided by sales into 100. Now let us look at the absorption of selling and distribution overheads. Selling and distribution overheads constitute about 30 to 40% of the total cost of the product. The selling and distribution overheads of each territory should be charged to different products sold in that area on a suitable basis. The methods of absorbing selling and distribution overheads are: number A, rate per article. This method is used for apportionment of costs of warehousing, transportation and advertisement. Overhead rate is calculated by adding up all such costs and then dividing it by the number of products sold in that area during a particular period of time. Point B, as a percentage of sales. This method is used for apportionment of direct selling costs, general administration, finance costs and miscellaneous expenses. Overhead rate is calculated by adding up all such costs and then dividing it by sales and then multiplying by 100. Number C, as a percentage of factory costs. This method is used in cases where distinction between variable and fixed selling and distribution overheads are to be made. Under such circumstances, variable selling and distribution overheads may be charged either by rate per article method or by percentage of sales method, or by percentage of works cost method. Fixed selling and distribution overheads may be charged as a percentage of works cost. Now let us look at the actual versus predetermined overhead rates. Overhead rates may be determined either on the actual basis or on a predetermined basis. Actual overhead rate is calculated by dividing the actual overheads to be absorbed by the actual quantity or value of the basis selected. The formula for calculating actual overhead rate is actual overhead rate is equal to actual overhead expenses during the month divided by the actual base for the month into 100. Predetermined overhead rates is determined in advance and is computed by the given formula. Predetermined overhead rate is equal to budgeted overheads for the period divided by budgeted base for the period into 100. Now let us look at the reasons for not absorbing overheads on the actual basis. Number 1, management wants to know the cost of the product in advance and actual overheads are known only after they have been incurred. This means that costs can be determined only after the end of the accounting period. This may not be useful for the management. Number 2, cost accounting can serve as an effective tool for the control of costs only when the costs are known in advance. Now let us look at the over and under absorption of overheads. Overhead absorption rates may be actual or predetermined, but usually because of certain reasons, overheads are charged at predetermined rates. Since predetermined rates are based on certain assumptions, actual overheads are found to be different from absorbed overheads. In case the amount of overheads recovered from the production is more than the actual overheads, it is known as over-absorption. And if the amount of overheads recovered from the production is less than the actual overheads, it is known as under-absorption. The reasons for under-absorption or over-absorption of overheads are: number 1, error in estimating the amount of overhead; number 2, error in estimating the level of production or hours to be worked; number 3, changes in methods or techniques of production; number 4, change in productive capacity; number 5, seasonal fluctuations in the overhead expenses. Now let us look at the treatment of over-absorption or under-absorption of overheads. Number 1, carrying over of overheads. Under this technique, the amount of over-absorbed or under-absorbed overheads is carried over to the subsequent years. This is possible under some circumstances. Like A, seasonal factory. In such cases, the balance of overheads for a period may be carried forward to the next year on the assumption that it will be counterbalanced at the end of the accounting year. B, new project. In such cases, if the output is low in the initial years, it may be carried forward to the next year. It is assumed that there will be more output in the next year, which will absorb more overheads. C, business cycles. If output is affected by business cycles and overhead rate has been predetermined for a period of more than 1 year, the balance of a year may be transferred to the next or subsequent years. Point number 2, use of supplementary rates. Supplementary rates are used when it is found that the actual and absorbed overheads cannot coincide. This may happen because of wrong estimation of overheads or wrong selection of base or changed circumstances. Under such circumstances, supplementary overhead rate is calculated by dividing the amount of over-absorption or under-absorption by the actual base. In case of under-absorption of overheads, the rate is termed as positive, whereas in case of over-absorption of overheads, the rate is termed as negative. In case of under-absorption, the cost of the product is increased by adding it to overheads charged on the basis of a positive supplementary rate, and in the case of over-absorption, the cost of the product is decreased by deducting the extra amount of overheads charged by applying a negative supplementary rate. Number 3, transfer to costing profit and loss account. Under this method, at the end of the accounting period, the amount of under-absorbed or over-absorbed overheads is transferred to costing profit and loss account. This happens when the amount of overheads is not very large or significant. Secondly, the under-absorption or over-absorption has caused due to some abnormal circumstances. The journal entry in such case will be costing profit and loss account debit to factory overhead control account. Illustration. In a manufacturing unit, overhead was recovered at a predetermined rate of Rs 25 per man day. The total factory overhead expenses incurred and the man days actually worked were Rs 41.50 lakhs and 1.50 lakhs days respectively. Out of the 40,000 units produced during a period, 30,000 were sold. On analyzing the reasons, it was found that 60% of the unabsorbed overheads were due to defective planning, and the rest were attributable to an increase in overhead costs. How will the unabsorbed overheads be treated in cost accounts? The solution: actual overheads is equal to Rs 41.50 lakhs, recovered overheads is equal to actual man days into rate, that is 1.50 lakhs, into Rs 25 is equal to Rs 37.50 lakhs. Under recovery of overheads is equal to actual overheads minus recovered overheads, that is Rs 41.50 minus 37.50 is equal to 4 lakhs. The reasons for under recovery are: 1. Defective planning, Rs 4 lakhs into 60 divided by 100 is equal to Rs 2.40 lakhs. Number 2. Increase in overhead costs, Rs 4 lakhs into 40 divided by 100 is equal to Rs 1.60 lakhs. The treatment of under recovery are: number 1, under recovery of Rs 2.40 lakhs on account of defective planning, being an abnormal case, should be transferred to costing profit and loss account. Number 2, under recovery of Rs 1.60 lakhs on account of increase in overhead rates will be recovered from cost of sales account and finished goods stock in the ratio of 3:1. This means charging of a positive supplementary rate. Amount to be charged will be calculated as: cost of sales is Rs 1.60 lakhs into 3 divided by 4 is equal to Rs 1.20 lakhs. Finished goods stock account is Rs 1.60 lakhs into 1 divided by 4 is equal to Rs 40 lakhs. That is all we have for you today. Hope you have understood this unit. We'll see you again with another topic on cost and management accounting. Till then, take care and bye-bye.